Are Rwandan dissidents being murdered by their own government? I'll ask the country's foreign minister, and I'll talk Muhammad Ali with boxer Amir Khan. I'm Mehdi Hassan. As Muhammad Ali, aka the Greatest, is buried in his hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, what's his legacy as a heavyweight champion and as a Muslim, an activist, a radical? I'll ask boxer Amir Khan. But first, in recent years, Rwanda, which was supposed to be the post-conflict success story of Africa, has come under fire from human rights groups and friendly governments for extrajudicial killings, crackdowns on the press, and most recently, President Paul Kagame's decision to back a constitutional amendment allowing him to run for a third term. His foreign minister says it's the will of the people. But is it really? This week's headliner, Rwandan Foreign Minister Louise Mushikiwabo. Louise Mushikiwabo, thank you for joining me on Upfront. Rwanda has made huge economic and democratic advances, huge progress since that awful, horrific genocide there 22 years ago. And yet, nevertheless, today, a plethora of international human rights groups line up to issue report after report criticising the human rights situation in your country. Human Rights Watch says your government, quote, does not tolerate dissent. It's documented arbitrary arrests, unlawful detentions, enforced disappearances. Amnesty International says Rwandan journalists, human rights defenders, members of the opposition face a repressive environment. As the foreign minister, as the face of your government abroad, do such regular criticisms embarrass you, make you uncomfortable?
No, the criticism that Rwanda receives partly comes from misunderstanding where Rwanda is trying to go. Everybody knows Rwanda's history and the genocide and the recovery, but we've made some choices as a nation and as a country that are not typical, that fit our own desires that we have for our country. And so, for example, Rwanda has opted, and Rwandans, because this was a very consultative process, to go for not confrontational but consensual politics. And so, you know, right there, when there is no confrontation and big fights in politics, then there is, you know, there are critics who think that there is repression and people cannot speak up, but those were really our choices from the beginning.
Locking people up without trial, arbitrary arrests, enforced disappearances, that's not consensus politics. Those are human rights abuses, documented by human rights groups and by even friends of yours.
Look, if you pick any country,
yes,
not just Rwanda, you can pick human rights issues.
But we're talking about
everywhere.
Rwanda today because you're the foreign. I've interviewed foreign ministers from other countries.
Sure.
I'm asking about Rwanda, when human rights groups, you know, the rankings aren't great. Reporters Without Borders ranks Rwanda 161 out of 180 countries when it comes to press freedom. It says in its most recent report that censorship is ubiquitous in Rwanda, and journalists who, quote, dare to criticize the government risk imprisonment or exile.
I've always wanted to know specifics about these cases. When you pick a country and say there are abuses of human rights, there is no freedom, there are no liberties, exactly what? Because it's important to go through these.
They mention the specifics. All the newspapers that are shut, journalists who are arrested, who have had to flee the country, the director of Christian Radio, the managing editor of the Russia newspaper, 2 women from the University of Rwanda radio station arrested for broadcasting material deemed offensive to the president. BBC Radio banned because it was accused of promoting genocide ideology. The BBC accused of promoting genocide ideology. Seriously?
Yes, absolutely. The BBC produced a documentary film which is a total denial of the history of Rwanda, particularly the history of the genocide. So in Rwanda, that is not acceptable. In the UK, maybe that's a different story.
I mean, look, the BBC can defend themselves. I think most people would question the BBC being genocide promoters. But it's not just the Reporters Without Borders.
The BBC refused to come to Rwanda and defend itself. We invited the BBC. It did not want to come and explain.
OK, but it's not just the BBC or Amnesty or Human Rights Watch or Reporters Without Borders. Governments who are allies of yours, friends of yours, the United States, for example, the US State Department said in a statement a couple of years ago it was deeply concerned by the arrest and disappearance of dozens of Rwandan citizens, people held incommunicado, and by, quote, credible reports that individual journalists had been threatened by the authorities. That's the US government. That's your ally.
There is nothing unusual about governments and allies disagreeing on things. The United States is indeed an ally of Rwanda. We've worked together for many years, but every now and then we disagree on certain things, on the way we do business, just as we find some of the practices in the United States not the way it would be done in Rwanda. So we respect that. We want to keep improving on any front, economic or political. But it's absolutely normal to have countries disagree with what Rwanda does.
So you're willing to take their aid money, but reject their criticism of your human rights?
Well, first of all, let's say that aid is not charity. And aid money that has come to Rwanda has been used effectively. We can account as a government for every dollar that comes into our country.
No one was suggesting otherwise in this particular... I'm just making the point that these are your allies saying this stuff. You've got the US government, you've even got your own fellow African government. South Africa expelled 3 Rwandan diplomats in 2014 after an attack on the home of an exiled Rwandan dissident, which came 3 months after the killing of the Rwandan former intelligence chief in Johannesburg, found strangled in his hotel room.
But you know that case has not been investigated. The results are not out. So I don't know.
But the South Africans think you were behind it. They kicked out 3 of your diplomats.
Well,
they didn't do that for no reason.
That would have to be adjudicated, and a court would have to decide on that. So as long as it's not decided, my government is not to be accused of anything.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that they're guilty of anything. I said the South Africans seem to think you were involved. That's all I'm saying. You would agree with that?
That's a way of justifying the question that you were posing.
No, it's a way of pointing out to you that you're on your own page. Everyone seems to not agree with you when it comes to these issues. Rwanda seems to be on its own.
Let me put it this way. Rwanda, as any other country that I know of, has its own way of doing things, and not everybody should be agreeing with what the government of Rwanda is doing.
Should everyone agree when the Rwandan defense minister said in relation to that murdered former intelligence chief, when you choose to be a dog, you die like a dog? President Kagame himself said, whoever betrays the country will pay the price, will face negative consequences. That's not your government basically nudging and winking that they were behind those killings? Let
me again put it this way. I don't know anybody who betrays a country that gets rewarded. Let me just put it this way.
Okay, but when you say you choose to be a dog, you die like a dog, is that an appropriate thing to say? Some might say that sounds like a gang leader, not a national leader.
When somebody comes after my country and threatens the security of my country.
Well, he's from your country, with respect. He was a former intelligence chief of your president.
Absolutely. So whomever it is.
He's a Rwandan.
If you threaten my country...
Did he threaten your country, the former
Yes, he did, absolutely.
Was he prosecuted?
Yes, he did.
What was he prosecuted for?
He absolutely did. No, we're talking about what he did.
I'm asking for what he was prosecuted
What he did is he allied himself with militias that were attacking Rwandans and throwing grenades in Rwanda.
Was he prosecuted for that? What was he prosecuted for?
Who was supposed to prosecute him?
Moments ago you told me that Rwandan government can't be accused of anything because it's not been adjudicated in a court of law. What was this former intelligence chief found guilty of in a court of law?
The government of Rwanda approached the government of South Africa to have this man extradited for trial.
Agreed, but he wasn't tried. So according to your criteria, if Rwanda is innocent of crimes because it's never been found guilty in a court of law, this man is also innocent of crimes.
But it's not.
I'm just using your logic,
It's not
Minister.
The government of Rwanda that refused to extradite him for
trial. But you agree he wasn't
We
actually...
didn't.
But you agree he was convicted of no crime.
We asked for him to be extradited.
But you agreed he was convicted of no crime. We agree on that. He was convicted of no crime.
How can he be convicted when he's not allowed to face trial, which is
and yet you're
what
celebrating
Rwanda
his death.
wanted?
Fair enough. And yet you're celebrating the death of a man who was convicted of nothing.
Why should I be unhappy about my enemies and people who threaten...
Well, we don't know who's threatened because he hasn't been tried, as you pointed out. A few years ago, your boss, President Kagame, told the Financial Times in an interview that I don't think anybody out there in the media, the UN, human rights organizations, has any moral right whatsoever to level any accusations against me or against Rwanda. Many would say that those are the words not just of authoritarian, that's quite megalomaniacal. I am above criticism. No one should criticize me.
What the president is saying is what he believes. President Kagame is a very accountable man, and everything he's done for Rwanda is out in the open. He's a man who's done extraordinary things for Rwanda. And he's also, if you know President Kagame, a man who doesn't hide or do things in the background. He's been totally accountable.
Why has he supported a constitutional amendment that was just passed, which effectively gives former presidents of Rwanda exemption from prosecution? Given the increasing level of criticism of your government, we've talked about some of the countries and groups that have criticised President Kagame, was it wise for him to support that constitutional amendment, which also allowed him to run now for a third 7-year term?
President Kagame has responded to what the people of Rwanda wanted, and there is nothing wrong with that. Why would he not? President Kagame has had time to reflect about what the people of Rwanda wanted. This is an exercise that went on for almost 2 years, eventually ended up in Parliament, and came to his political party. His political party
supported it.
Supported it.
You support it.
Absolutely.
And yet, it allows President Kagame to potentially stay in office until 2034, which would put him in office for a total of 34 years, more than a third of a century, in a country that's a young democracy, a fragile democracy. Is that healthy for someone to be in power for a third of a century?
First of all, let's not anticipate what the future will be in Rwanda. Second, I don't see what's wrong with staying in office. I think what we need to be worried about is what people do while in office. For me and for many Rwandans, democracy is not about coming and going. It's about exactly what you do when you're in office. And again, it's a decision of the people. If they want any leader out of the office, it's their prerogative.
Before we finish, we've talked a lot about human rights criticisms of your country, but there's one area where you're heavily praised on the human rights front, and that's when it comes to women's rights and representation. The Rwandan parliament isn't just a majority female parliament, it has the highest proportion of female MPs of any legislature in the world. How did that happen?
The story of Rwanda and the rights of women is a story rooted in our belief that men and women are equal. That women can do, if not as well, better than men. And I think the women in Rwanda's parliament have proven that. We are an administration and a country that feels that a big portion of our population should not be left out. So it's a deliberate policy. But I think over time, women in Rwanda have delivered. They've produced both at the level of legislature, but also in the socio-economic transformation of the country. They've done a very good job. So that's how it happened. Results were a motivating factor for Rwandans to bring more women into both parliament but also the executive.
And under Rwanda's constitution, almost 1/3 of parliamentary seats have to be occupied by female politicians. Do you think that's a model which other countries that lack Rwanda's level of female representation, for example the United States, should copy, should emulate? Is quotas the way forward?
I don't know what every country has to choose their own path. So it's not up to me to say what countries should be copying from Rwanda. But certainly there have been very good things in Rwanda that could be helpful elsewhere.
Louise Mushikiwabo, thanks for joining me on Upfront.
Thank you. Pleasure.
The death of my hero, your hero, Muhammad Ali, has rightly dominated global news headlines. Tributes have poured in from presidents, sports stars and celebrities worldwide. Liberals and conservatives alike have lined up to sing his praises. Call me a cynic, but sorry, I can't believe that all of it is truly heartfelt and genuine. Think about it. If a top black athlete today converted to Islam and then declared that he wouldn't, quote, help murder and burn another poor nation simply to continue the domination of white slave masters because his real enemy was at home, he would be denounced as a traitor, as anti-American. If that top black athlete today called for reparations, saying the US government should admit its guilt over slavery and take $25 billion from its defense budget to build houses for black Americans, he'd be dismissed as a divisive crackpot. If that top black athlete today declared his, quote, support for the Palestinian struggle to liberate their homeland and oust the Zionist invaders, he'd annoy a lot of top politicians and might even be labeled an anti-Semite. But those are the exact things that Ali did say. And remember, back when he was saying this stuff, he was reviled too. He was attacked and demonized. Millions hated Ali. Top sports writers called him a punk and the white man's burden. The NSA tapped his phone. Yet today he's lauded by the same types of people who slammed him in the 60s and 70s. Today he's praised by political and media elites for supposedly transcending race and religion. As one commentator pointed out, throughout US history, white Americans have toned down the life stories of radical people of color so that they can celebrate them as they want them to be, not as they were. But the inconvenient truth for establishment types now jumping on the Ali bandwagon is that he was a radical, a revolutionary, a proud black Muslim American who railed against both domestic racism and foreign wars. And look, I'm not saying it's not a good thing that so many powerful people have either changed their views on Ali and what he stood for, or pretended not to notice what he stood for. Nor am I saying they're all hypocrites. No, all I want is a little more consistency and a little less whitewashing of history. Let me finish with a line from the poet Maya Angelou, who once said, "People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Muhammad Ali made millions of us feel proud of our identity, our ethnicity, our political views, our religious beliefs, and we will never forget him. Rest in peace, my brother. Rest in peace.
I am the greatest.
To discuss the late, great Muhammad Ali and what he meant both for boxing and for Muslims, I'm joined from the UK by the boxer and Muslim, former two-time world champion, Olympic silver medalist, Amir Khan. Amir, thanks for joining me on Upfront. How did you feel last week when you heard Muhammad Ali had passed away?
It was a massive shock to us all, to be honest with you. I mean, it was a massive shock to me. I've been looking up to Muhammad Ali since I started boxing. It's one of the reasons I started boxing was because of Muhammad Ali. And when I heard that, I was really, really upset. I just didn't have anything to say. I was just really upset. And I'm glad I had the chance to meet him, not once but twice. And those moments when I did meet him are going to be very special to me in my life. When I first met him, it was literally after I came back from Saudi Arabia. I did my Umrah, I did my pilgrimage, and he stuck his hand out and shook my hand. He said to me, obviously well done for going there. But you could see everything about him. I mean, he was just such a charming guy. He was smiling all the time.
You say that you got into boxing because of him. He was an inspiration to you. How so? Did you watch all his fights as you were growing up in the 80s? I mean, his fights happened in the 70s. But were you an avid watcher of his fights?
I started watching a lot of his fights in the 90s. And me and my dad used to sit down and watch his fights. And I remember watching one of them, which was the Rumble in the Jungle, which was against George Foreman. And that was my favourite fight because one thing about Ali was, he was going into that fight as the underdog against someone who was going to take him out, knock him out, but he just turned the tables. He beat him. And first of all, what I liked about Muhammad Ali as well was he used to beat his opponents with his mouth, before the fight. I mean, he used to predict rounds, and that just never happens in boxing, and he just did things that were special, and whatever he said came true.
What impact do you think he had on boxing and on sport more broadly?
I think he put boxing on the map, really. Boxing early 60s was as known. When Muhammad Ali came on the scene with all the trash talking he did, I mean, people might not like it, might not liked it at the time, but I'm sure they got used to it. I mean, people started, taking more notice in boxing, and now especially boxing is one of the top sports in the world. And I think that's because of people like Muhammad Ali who made it at the top, who made it special, who made it, for the fans and everything else there.
And what do you think it is about boxing and about sport more broadly that helps break down barriers and brings people together regardless of race, religion, culture?
Yeah, Muhammad Ali was a Muslim, and if you look at the people who used to watch him fight, they were from all over the world. For example, when I fight, I'm a Muslim as well, and when I fight in front of thousands of people, and maybe 10% of the thousands of people that have come to watch me are Muslims. So the Jewish community come to watch me. I get the Christian community, the white community, the black community. They all come to support, and that's what sport does. Sport definitely brings everyone together, and I think Ali just did the same as well.
And how big a role do you think his faith played in terms of making him a role model for people like you? You say you're a Muslim boxer. He was a Muslim boxer who spoke repeatedly and publicly and proudly about his faith, about God, about what Islam meant to him. What role did that play in bringing someone like you, making someone like you a fan of his?
The reason I became a fan was because he spoke what he thought was right. He was never afraid to talk about anything. I mean, you get some people who just don't want to talk about their religion, and he made me the way I am as well, because I don't mind talking about my religion. Being a Muslim, I'm proud to be a Muslim. And Muhammad Ali, in a way, I took that leaf out of his book, because he was one guy who used to always talk about being a Muslim, being a good Muslim, and also, by following the Quran. And for example, when he was asked to go to the war, he refused to go to the war, and he was put into jail. That was because of his Muslim religion that told him not to hurt innocent people. So, little things like that you kind of learn off people like Muhammad Ali.
And at a time when Islamophobia is on the rise in Europe, in the United States, across the West, do you think there are enough Muslim role models, not just in the sporting world, but in public life in general? I mean, we've lost a major one.
Yeah, I think we need more, to be honest with you, because, we need to show people that us Muslims, that we are good people, we respect everyone. And in the Quran it says we have to respect everyone and not hurt or harm anyone. So I just think that people have got the wrong end of the stick when they say Muslims are all bad. I think that's just the wrong way of looking at it, because in every religion there's always a handful of good and a handful of bad. It's just a shame that Muslim people always get pointed fingers at and always be seen as bad people. If you look at me, I mean, I'm a good person, and I want people to follow my footsteps by doing good things with the community and everything else. And that's what Muhammad Ali did, the same thing. He did a lot of work for his religion and also did a lot of work with his community, regardless if they were Muslim or not.
Given people do see a lot of Muslims as terrorists, they see Islam, Muslims, they automatically think negative things. Do you think there's a burden? Do you feel a burden on someone like yourself, who is a celebrity in the public eye, a sports star, you've represented your country? Do you feel there's a special burden, maybe an annoying burden on you, to have to always say, well, look at me, I'm not the violent Muslim, I'm not the bad Muslim? And do you feel you have to speak out to try and cancel out that negativity?
I do all the time, and I'm happy to speak out because, I stand to... I stand up as a Muslim, as a proud Muslim, as a proud British Muslim person, and the reason I stand up is because I want to show people out there is that, look, us Muslims are not all bad. I mean, there might be terrorist attacks happening around the world. I'm against that, just like other Muslim people around the world who are against that. So I think it's wrong when people just point the finger at you. I think everyone's different in their own way. It's just a shame that there's a few people who make it worse for us all.
Do you think there'll ever be another Muhammad Ali?
It'll be very difficult. It'll be very difficult. One person who was not only great inside the boxing ring, but even greater outside the boxing ring, because he wanted to be known as a people's champion and always spoke what was right.
Just on you personally, Amir, as a professional boxer, former two-time world champion, you're 29 years old, you've been Olympic silver medalist, fought around the world. What's next for you in the ring? What's next for Amir Khan before you hang up your gloves? Yeah, next for me, I believe I'm at my peak of my career now, where I won the biggest fights, and the last fight was a massive fight. I moved up 2 weight categories against Saulo Alvarez. Obviously, didn't win the fight, but it's all about going back to the drawing board and seeing where we go from here. Now, I've got some huge fights in front of me in the 147-pound division. I'm still the #1 WBC titleist, so I can fight for that title anytime. I've still got some great years ahead of me, so I'll be back in the ring and I'll be coming back stronger. Your parents are from Pakistan. You've done a lot of charity work in Pakistan. You've started a boxing academy there recently. But you also caused a bit of a stir recently, saying you'd love to fight for Pakistan at the Rio Olympics this summer. You were accused of being anti-British, of being a traitor. What's your response to your critics? Yeah, my response to that was, the reason I said that was because Pakistan has no fighters. Now, whereas Great Britain, where I'm from, I've already represented Great Britain in the Olympic Games in 2004. And the reason I said that was because Great Britain already has a full team. Now, it'd be so bad if I stepped in front of someone who already has qualified, and I stepped in there because I'm a bigger name. I'm going to ruin his dreams. So I didn't want to do that. That's what I said. That's why I said that I'd like to represent Pakistan, because in that sense, I won't be spoiling someone else's dream, if you get what I mean. And do you still plan to do that?
Well, it just depends, because I'm under contract as a professional fighter, so I don't think my contract allows me. But look, if I am allowed to do that, look, I'd love to represent Great Britain again. But the only reason I said I represent Pakistan is because they've already got a fighter in my position, in my weight category, and I don't want to spoil that fighter's dream, because the Olympics makes you, and the Olympics made me, so I would never want to do that to anyone.
Amir Khan, thanks for joining me on Upfront.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
That's our show. Upfront will be back next week.